So Carl, when you're ready, I'll let you direct the show.
What? What?
Or do you
Oh,
want
yeah.
me to? I wasn't really sure who's going to be starting off with things.
I don't know. I guess I can, since I'm the stunt double for Cliff Stockdale today.
Yeah.
Okay, so first things first, since we do have a guest, Angela, and when some of the people were here, you said a few words, but if you would introduce yourself, kind of talk about your experience with photography, what you're looking for in a camera club, that kind of thing.
Sure, and a big shout out and thank you to Gwen for the reference.
You're welcome.
Yes, my name is Angela Nelson, and I work in human resources for Mercy Housing for now going on 20 years. And I have a huge interest in photography. So my mom said, join a club. And I take pictures with my iPhone, which turn out to be really good pictures. I love angles. I love all different facets. I can't wait to learn more from you all. One of my favorite things to take pictures with are cloud formations and the sun and the sky and the colors and how all that ties in. So I have a lot of pictures of the sky from different angles and real powerful. So I really enjoy it. Thank you.
Nice. Well, welcome, and I hope that you consider joining us. We'll do some follow-up emails after this, and hopefully get you to join and everything. But yeah, we do a competition every month and have a different subject each month. So, you know, that's how we challenge ourselves and challenge each other. So, I don't see any of the other guests that I sent emails to. So, since I don't know what I'm doing really, because Cliff usually handles this stuff, but all I would say, I was looking for Victoria, our president, because I was going to ask her, but I will ask everybody who's here. Did anyone attend the Railroad Museum shindig this past Sunday?
Oz did.
What did Todd?
Oh, that's right.
And David did. And Laura did.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. And did you have an enjoyable time? I mean, how was it? If you'd like to share.
Yeah, it was
Don't
good.
tell them. Don't tell them. They have to come to 5 to you. Tell them, then they're not going to want to come.
Fair enough, Todd. Fair enough.
Yeah, Steve was there too.
Okay, so well, I guess a good time was had by all, and wonderful pictures will be seen in the next few competitions this year. And speaking of competitions, obviously tonight is abstracts. And next month will be transportation. So those of you who went to the Railroad Museum, I'm sure will have lots of images that will be suitable for next month. So, Paul, I'm assuming that Cliff had communicated with you, talked about our scoring process and how we kind of do things, and cool. Okay, good. I'm sure I'll still screw it up, Carl. You what?
I said, I'm sure I'll still screw it up.
Okay, well, you'll fit in. That's good. It's all right. That'll work. Okay, so a bit about Paul. He is a passionate corporate and portrait photographer based in Colorado since 2005. Paul's passion of purpose back in 1999 when he sold everything, traveled across the country for years, and captured his entire journey through a lens, something probably a few of us have dreamed of. Although he continues to operate his photography business, his primary mission in life is to be of service to others. So we thank you for coming to serve us tonight. Currently, he is the department chair of the Visual Audio and Media Arts Department at Red Rocks Community College. And by his own admission, he works way too much. Paul, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I'll mention a couple other things. I am a corporate and advertising photographer. I've been shooting for 5280 magazine for I don't know, 7, 8 years. I shot for the Denver Broncos for 7, 8 years or something like that. And a few other magazines. Definitely shooting less than I used to. I only take on certain clients now. I'm mostly, I oversee graphic design, fine art photography, commercial photography, film, video, a few other programs here at Red Rocks Community College, as Laura could attest to. Yep, absolutely love it. I do work way too many hours, and hopefully I'll get to take some time off this summer. So this is a little bit more about me. I'm glad to be here.
Very good. Well, thank you. And I'm kind of glad that Focus was able to bring some old friends back together again. Okay, so Bob, are you ready?
Ready.
Okay, well, as per usual, we'll ask that everybody mute themselves. Obviously, when we get back to, talking to each of the people who are shines in the tens, we'll, you need to unmute and make sure that we can hear you. But for now, we just want to hear Paul and his opinion on our images. So if you're ready, Bob, share your screen and let's roll. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yep. And you just want me to quickly roll through and give some of my thoughts and then give kind of the rating right after that? Does that usually work?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
perfect. Well,
Okay, so this first image is titled Smooth Abstract.
so for me, when I first look at this image, it's a great title. It is smooth. And it has some nice lines going through it. It is, for me, it's definitely not have any representational really idea of what it is, which is nice. I can make some guesses, but still, it's a good image of being able to have, taking some of the shadows and making kind of that as the positive rather than the negative of whatever that subject is, which is really nice. There's certainly some nice movement. For me, I would have probably had a little bit more negative space up top. For me, the line is a little bit too high. I would have liked to seen it a little lower in the subject. But overall, I really liked it. I think you could have created a little bit more dynamic weight by allowing that line, that horizontal line, such a strong horizontal line, to be a little lower. Overall, really nicely done with the contrast. It's nice that, the blacks are not so black. It's kind of nice. It kind of adds to that smoothness. So it's not like this stark black and white image. So not only for me, the subject is smooth, but the editing also lent itself to it. So I thought it did a really well done job in doing that. So that's kind of where I ended up on that image. And I would give this an 8.
8. Oh, good.
Hey, Joe, you're supposed to be muted, man. This is number 9.
So for me, this one isn't for me quite as abstract. There's some elements there. I think that I'm getting some nice textures, some nice elements. I think in this particular image could have been a little sharper, just a little bit more sharpening in post if the image is sharp. It does have a nice kind of break with that kind of orange burnt color by having kind of that gray silverish look kind of towards the center, which is kind of nice, which kind of breaks up, making it a little bit more dynamic of an image. It has a little bit more weight there, not only with that kind of gray bluish silver area, but also because it has more of that circular padding, which is really nice, that I think kind of adds some interesting elements to this image. For me, it still feels a little flat overall. It doesn't have a lot of kick to it, doesn't have a lot of depth. For me, I think we could have pushed the blacks a little bit more, maybe gone in a little tighter really to deal with some of those textures on the image. On this image, I would give it a 7.
layered light.
So I'm going to take a second to look at this. Certainly an interesting use of horizontal lines. Certainly looks like some sort of mountain range. Sitting on this image for me for a little bit, one of the challenges that I have with this image is having the weight. Visual weight usually likes to be, right now the image is top heavy. And so a lot of times when you have the blacks and kind of those quarter tones on the shadow side, many times you want that at the bottom of the image because it becomes so overwhelmingly heavy at the top that it makes it sometimes hard to look at. My eye really wants to go to the bottom, which is the yellow, the brightest part of the image. And but it feels like it needs to be flipped the other way. And I would give this image a 7.
Undulating metal.
So for me, this is an amazing image as far as being able to kind of really push form here, to really be able to create depth through light, having some of that light, not hard light, just kind of that light caressing, some of that metal along the tops, having the smooth lines of the repetition, that really kind of builds a lot of impact visually on this image. All of the lines of what is going on, it is not about the subject, it is about really the light pushing the curved lines throughout the image, being able to certainly crop where it was cropped, having some sharp. Do you mind if I, Carl, do you mind if I annotate a little bit every once in a while?
Oh, please do.
Okay.
I wish more judges would,
Okay.
Because yeah, that would be very helpful.
Sure. So, taking an image up here at the very top, I think this is an interesting area, taking all of these smooth lines and then really adding this really sharp edge to the top, which is very different than the rest of the image. But yes, the nice curve here, the light coming across the top overneath of it, I can really get a sense of a lot of movement, a lot of interesting perspective here. And for me, this one is definitely a 10. Gorgeous abstract.
This is River of Colors.
So a couple of things that I think that are interesting for me. This one is there is some abstract, but there is some representation going on. There's some reality here for me that I can really understand that this is water. It still has that idea of abstract in it because I don't know quite what's going on. A couple interesting things from here is it's nice to feel kind of the smooth water over there against the contrast of kind of that sharp contrasty areas. For me, this image gets a little bit too much about all of the textures that it becomes a little overwhelming to look at. I think that for me is probably the biggest challenge here is it just feels a little too sharp in certain areas, certainly down in here. Having some nice smooth lines here for sure helps, is kind of nice. It builds a base for the image because it is large compared to the rest of the spots or shapes that are throughout the entire image, which makes it look interesting. I think one of the other things that I think helps this image here is that having kind of these green little spots here, having the smooth shapes over here, and having the yellow here, that strong shape down there, really kind of helps move the area, your eye throughout the image, kind of going from one spot to the other spots. And for me, the composition here doesn't quite help the image as much as I want. I think the image is a little bit too 9:12 ratio for me, or at least a longer ratio, kind of more landscapey for me. But overall, interesting image. I wish it was a little bit more abstract, but still certainly fits into this category. And I would give this one an 8.
This is Fall Leaves Pop Ventosa.
So for me, we're still representing trees here. I think we can have it fall into the abstract, but it really lends itself to representing trees and the integration of life. There's a lot of story here for me. There's multiple layers that are going on here that's really creating the story. But for me, as we start to create a story, I feel like we start to lose some of that abstract of where life is going. Kind of, I see some green and some other leaves and some trees. For me, this is a gorgeous image and would really lend itself to being really, really big. To be able to have somebody really be able to explore some of the ideas. There's lots of ideas going on in here. Lots of changes in opacity as you go from one layer to the other layer throughout it. Certainly looking down here, having kind of that lighter, whiter shade versus some of the darker areas here, and then kind of going back and forth. So for me, super interesting image. For the only thing for me is it's not quite abstract. We are really representing trees and life, and the wood, the bark, some of the other things. And so, Carl, this is where I have a question. For me, this isn't super abstract, so I don't know if this is something that we would want to move or not. But I am certainly happy to rate this as an 8.
Okay. Red ball.
Really graphical. As I first look at this, it really, more than just being a photograph, it's has a lot of graphic design elements. It looks like a note to me. Really good use of for me, what's interesting is that you have this ball, which has, this line here creating some shadow, kind of trying to build form, but still being very flat. It's a really interesting, it's something that I could look at for a while trying to figure it out because it looks so graphical. You see this thing that is super 2D here, but then you see the light coming from this way and you have a nice shadow, kind of like the soft shadow. It looks like a bigger light source that's kind of closer, really kind of lending itself to really have that nice transition from highlight to shadow. And I really appreciate that, but certainly it makes it more complex for me because I would expect it to have lots of depth, and it does not. It is very two-dimensional in nature. The other thing for me, I think one of the interesting things about this image, which is not quite as apparent, which I think really lends itself to being helpful, is this and this. Having this line here really helps create some grounding for the image itself, and creating a base, as well as kind of pushing a little bit of weight over here. So I really like seeing some of that information over there to really kind of help carry this through so it doesn't become too top heavy as an image. And I would also give this image an 8.
Fringes.
Really nice color. I really like the use of color between both sides, the repetition of building kind of that horizontal line right here. So you have these stacks of kind of going up. For me, this isn't as strong compositionally. I almost want to see it be almost more the same between here, and here. But with that being said, really nice use of color from left to right. I also wonder what it would have looked like if it would have been rotated to the left and having these on the bottom rather than on the side. I think the other thing that I think is a little bit of a challenge for me is it's really sharp for me here, and I would like to see that a little smoother. It almost feels over sharpened in these areas. I am looking at it on my screen as well. And so for me, I think it might have been because this is, I don't know, for me, I guess the subject really is this, and this becomes the background over here, that I really expect this to be a little smoother. And I think that if a little bit other areas were a little less sharp and a little bit more, one little area sharper and a little less sharp in another area, I think would have helped to create a little bit more depth. But with the aqua green bluish feeling so sharp, it makes the image feel a little bit more flat than I would expect. But you know, I do like the repetition, and I would give this one a 7.
Blue waters.
My first initial reaction is it's too saturated. Coming from a commercial background, it almost feels like it's almost at a gamut to be able to print such extreme colors. And for me, this one has a little bit too much saturation. It is nice to have some of the waves here that are a little bit smoother, having these having a little bit more texture, and then having this up here with a little bit of green coloring that's up here. For me, again, I think we can still put it under abstract, but it still becomes more about water. One of the things I look at when I'm looking at an abstract, for me at least, is that I really appreciate when I look at an abstract where it is almost representational of the object, but it's not about the object whatsoever. It's about the light, the depth, the perspective, the lines, the repetition, really everything else that's going on it, not the subject itself. And so for me, this is still representational of water, not the lines in the water, not the contrast or the movement that's being created. And that gets a little lost. So maybe going in a little tighter with this image, or coming from a different angle, or waiting for even a different time of day, or maybe potentially changing so the contrast, the saturation isn't quite so much. And I would give this one a 7.
Wind and sea.
There's an interesting dynamic that's going on here. You have an image that has that kind of yellow, orange, red. It's almost analogous in nature, having some of the image to feel like it's calming, but still with the lines, there's this fight, some tension of looking at the image because it's got some grit to it. So I find it interesting having kind of that calming colors, but still having kind of that grit, having some really, shadows are pretty deep down here, which is nice. I also really appreciate having a nice foundation here with the shadows, and really creating kind of like a nice, horizon line of some sort, whatever this happens to be. And so I do find this image interesting as far as from a composition point of view. It doesn't have a lot of voice to me, or create a lot of impact, but there's certainly some interesting things going on in here, and I'd give this one a 7.
Spiraling.
Just bringing it up on the other screen so I can see it.
Sure.
So looking initially at this image for me, again, it's a staircase, and it is about the staircase still, because these lines are so strong in here, we're losing some of the abstract nature. I love the textures. I love that 3D feel of having it extrude from there and just going out at me in kind of physically giving that kind of three-dimensional look, almost to the point of kind of looking like a cityscape. And so there's some really interesting elements for me, even looking right here in this area where, you know, there's a lot going on, and then to be able to isolate this, and it, in this particular case, for me, it feels like kind of that rule of thirds, where it does draw my eye down there. And because this image can be very overwhelming because there's so much going on, it almost becomes too dynamic. And having this area just kind of brings and calms it back just a little bit, which is kind of interesting for me. Again, you know, I think abstract has some abstract elements in there, but it's still representational of a staircase, and a staircase that's going up that's rounded. So again, some interesting elements going on here from what I'm looking at. I really like it. This image, for me, looking at it, you know, I think, you know, we're looking on a screen that for some of us is maybe 1920 or 4K or 5K. This is something that I think would increase for me if I was looking at this that was like 5 or 6 feet, you know, tall. I think would have a greater impact for me on this image, because it lends itself to wanting to be really, really big and not be small, because there is so much going on that I think it gets lost at such a small size. So for me, another 8.
Surge.
Great color, nice and soothing color. Just looking at the color on my screen. You know, so for me, all of the interesting things in this image is really all of these textures that are going on all over the place throughout the image. And I think for me, where I get lost is you have this this black hole, which becomes positive. It becomes the subject. And I don't want that to be the subject. I want everything else in the image to be subject. Some really interesting textures, really interesting lines. You know, I think, you know, seeing this line here, giving some weight down here, seeing all of these lines here, the repetition here, lots of repetition going through the image, lot to look at, but my eye keeps getting drawn back to what I don't want to look at, which is this big, huge black area. And so for me, you know, I think great color, great contrast, good abstract, but the black hole, the black spot is pulling me away from the image, which I don't want it to be. There's so many other things to be able to explore. And when you isolate a shape like that, your eye keeps going back to it, at least for me. I don't mind these highlights down here at all. I think it adds a little bit of texture and interest. It also builds some visual weight from left to right, which I think is also interesting, but it's not overwhelming that I keep looking at all of the other interesting things in the image. The only thing that I think that, you know, I like all of these other spots over here. I'm not a huge fan of having just a random spot. That's not really associating anything with me. So I personally would have cleaned that up. I don't think that adds anything to the image here. And so I would have just removed it. It looks good everywhere else. It feels like it's supposed to be there. And so I would also give this one an 8.
This is Starlight, Starbright.
Awesome contrast, great use of lines, being able to really see all of the, you know, I want to know what this is. I think I know what it is. I feel like I'm connected to it in so much, so abstract. And I think that it feels like it's a light bulb. It feels like it's literally screaming at me. So well done to be able to really control the contrast in the image, being able to really control all of the lines and the repetition, and really being able to separate it from the background out here. I think it was really well done. I like the square format here. I think for me, what really, for me, really throws me off is I'm assuming there's some sort of flowers here. For me, it's a really confusing image, which I absolutely love. But really, for me, the strongest part of the image is all of these lines here of really being able to explore and see it. And I love that, it has a lot of contrast, but there's still a lot of really good midtones in there. Some really good use of grays and not getting rid of it. I think that keeping some of those grays in here and it really kept your whites, more of your highlights, really pushing them forward. And keeping it gray didn't overtake everything. So really well done image. And for me, I would give this a 10.
Gnarly Knot.
Again, great contrasts, really good use of really being able to feel the textures in the image. It's always good when I can look at something and want to be able to feel it, to be able to touch it. It feels like I should be able to touch it on screen because the texture is so well done. And again, I think it has a lot to how well this subject was lit. And again, it's probably some sort of tree, but with that being said, what an amazing use of white and blacks down here in this area here as well. I really get an opportunity to really explore the image. I really like that the visual weight over here is really strong versus over here where there is really no highlights. And so, but it's not overwhelmingly so much that it pulls the image to the right so much that it just doesn't work. It's enough that it really makes the image really dynamic. I really get to explore multiple different facets in here. There's even areas like here where it doesn't even bother me that there's this it almost feels like a finger thing down there, is straight, which doesn't feel like it should be part of the image, and it still very much works for me. Again, there's a lot to really absorb in here. I like where it's sharp and where it does feel like it kind of goes a little soft towards the edges. The blacks look great on the edges, really kind of giving me some good foundation and really just a well executed black and white abstract image. And I would give this a 10.
Bathroom bokeh.
Well, definitely an abstract. Certainly, certainly an interesting use of repetition. But that repetition almost becomes a little overwhelming for me. Certainly there's some colors in there, giving me some rainbows from just the refraction of light here and here. Certainly looking at some of the highlights down here, as well as going into more of the shadows down here. It almost becomes so overwhelming that the image becomes flat. I wish I had a little bit more depth in the image, being able to see and be able to separate some of the circles to be able to kind of have an idea. Areas like this draw my eye away more than I want to. And I also wonder, because of where kind of those deep shadows are, again, it would have been interesting to see what this image looked like if we were to rotate it clockwise. Because again, I think that this is kind of pulling my eye away, as well as some of these highlights are pulling my eye away. And again, I also wonder what this image would look like if it was printed a little bit, if it was printed big, 5-6 feet, and make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more detailed to be able to really explore and not have some of these areas kind of take away from that. Because again, when you have a lot of repetition, our eyes have it really start looking for something that is not repetitive in the image, and then all of a sudden that becomes the subject. So it is kind of, for me, I know when I'm photographing repetition stuff, I have to be very careful not to break that repetition in a way that makes the viewer look at the things that are not repetition. I would even say down here as well, I think kind of hurts the image. And I would give this one a 7.
Rocky Mountain Sunshine.
I feel like I'm losing the artist in this one. I think for me, this could have been explored a little bit more. I really like, I've seen this, this effect a few times, and I really do like this. I almost want to see more of those, the V shape on both of these a little bit more and have a little bit more repetition of that, so that it becomes a little bit more abstract and not about the mountain itself. Because right now, yes, it's there, but I'm certainly seeing through, and I'm looking at the mountains, the snow, the sky. I don't know. For me, certainly artistic and interesting. I don't think, again, for me, personally would put this in the abstract. Even if I don't know what this is, it's very representational of a mountain. It's not about the textures of the mountain. It's not about the highlights and the shadows or the shapes. It's really about the mountain for me, and how the person is exploring, kind of bringing through that the V shape of the trees and other items that are behind inside of those shapes. And so for me, I would give this one a 7.
Designs in Blue.
So for me, the frame detracts from the subject. This becomes almost, the framing almost becomes too much. And I don't want that to be part of the image. I want to look at just the image itself and not become overwhelmed. So for me, the frame comes too far forward, and I'm looking at that, and it's partially because it's so graphical versus what the image is, and just having those hard lines back there. And I know you're using color, which I think is interesting, that those lines have with the image. But with that being said, I personally would just let the image speak for itself and not have the frame as part of it. The other thing that I really do enjoy about the image is that I'm literally fighting with the foreground and background as I look at the image. At first, I'm looking at the foreground, which I think is the vertical lines, trying to look at what that is. And then I can flip it and make the foreground some of that, what looks like paint, and some of that objects back here of some of the blues and some of those other greens that are back there. So it's really fun to be able to flip between having the foreground is one thing and then being able to go the other way with it. So for me, kind of interesting to look at. I see there's some sort of vignette here on all the 4 corners. I'm not a real huge fan of having a white vignette, although in one ways it does help create some depth, but I would be interesting to see what it would look like without having that white vignette up there, whether applied in post or in real life. It would be interesting. It certainly, in some ways, maybe even helps take the subject of having these lines in the foreground and then having this white vignette actually flip the subject background. So in some ways it could help. I would love to be able to explore this image both with and without that kind of that white vignette back there. And I would give this one a 7.
S-curve on display.
Love the beauty, the romance of really enjoying the flow here. I think it really helps me just see that kind of repetition again and again and again. And it allows me to kind of even potentially explore just kind of that smoothness and that gracefulness. Anytime I see some of that, oddly enough, just from my own practical experience of me riding motorcycles in the mountains, being able to bring me into an experience that I had, even though it has nothing to do with being on motorcycles. So I think it's, for me, there is some voice here, and the subject or the photographer is allowing me to be able to apply my own voice and my own perspective with the image. So I really like that. The one thing that I think that detracts for the image from me is the grit. It's really sharp in these areas. It almost feels over sharpened for me. Again, let me see how many pixels this image is. Give me a second, I'm looking for it.
Yeah, we max out at 1600 wide and 1080 tall.
Yeah, okay, so this image is about 1,000, I think. Yeah, it's 1,400. I think for me, we have to consider sharpness based on how we're looking at the image. When I sharpen an image, that's going to be 5 feet versus 2 inches is definitely going to be different. So I think making sure, for me, I would have explored this to have a little less, whether that's noise or sharpening, whatever the effect is for me. I think it detracts from the image, and really, instead of adding contrast between the gracefulness and the harshness of that sharpness of the grain or the rock itself, or the texture of the rock, I think it's battling itself a little too much for me and starts to remove some of the voice that I really want from the image. Having this really heavy shadow up here, it works, and that's partially because there's really strong kind of diagonal lines here with a lot of shadow. So it really, for me, really kind of, you build this really good foundation here, and then you throw up this nice heavy shadow up there to really build some weight in the image and really give me some more stuff to be able to explore. So in the end, I think one of the biggest changes that I personally would make is to deal with some of that kind of that contrasty grain texture that's happening on whatever that happens to be. And I'd give this one an 8.
Abstract in sandstone.
So when I first see this image, I think of leading lines to a subject. I really see kind of these arrows, and it's partially because they all end at the same time. So I see like arrow here, like it's happening repetitively here, and it's stopping me at this subject here, but I want to know what that is. What are you leading me to? And I'm kind of getting lost in that. Like, I want to be able to see some sort of subject here. The same thing is happening here. So you have this repetition of having this kind of curved line happen over and over again, which means that you're pushing me this way visually. But again, where are you bringing me to? You're bringing me back to this line, which then brings me down here. But then I end at, really, for me, nothing. I almost wonder if it would have looked different if we would have gone in a little tighter. To really be able to push these lines and make them the subject. Because right now, I want those lines to be the subject, and they're not. So for me, I think you could crop this in a couple different ways to make this a little bit more interesting. I even think kind of like something like this might have been a little bit more interesting. So it's not about that, just that one shape down there, or potentially, for me, doing something like this, then all of a sudden it becomes really, really strong and really abstract and really diagonal, which I think is super interesting. I don't think the bottom left really adds any value to me. Let me, down here where we see kind of these smooth lines happening. Again, you have these lines here. It's there, it's the background, but really these strong, darker tones and these lines are the subject, and I get lost a little bit here. So for me, this one's a 7.
A fantasy world.
Carl, how am I doing on time, by the way? Am I going too fast, too slow?
I think it's about right. I personally, I appreciate all this stuff that you're talking about, the annotations, that, picking out the details and things, and
Okay,
hopefully
perfect.
everybody else feels the same way.
Awesome. Okay, so great textures here. Really interesting. For me, where I get lost a little bit is because it becomes, you're giving me in too much environment, and it's becoming, I start to have some association with the physical world in this particular image. And so this right here becomes the subject. So everything down in here. And so I think one of the ways that might have helped kind of detract from making, I don't want this to be the subject. Because right now this is the subject. Abstract, yes. Gorgeous textures, gorgeous use of lines, but this is becoming overwhelmingly the subject. And I think one of the ways that we could have kept that from helping or having that happen. And again, I think if you would have cropped it more like this, so it almost becomes more of a, I just lost the word. Oh my gosh, it just literally left. I guess more sleep would help, really being able to have symmetry. Whew, that was a rough one. Is having more of a symmetry here, so that it kind of really pushed the subject away. It made it less about this and more about all of the repetition of these lines. So I think this is the part that hurts the worst in this image. Beautiful, good contrast, super interesting to look at, but again, too much about the subject. I want this to be more abstract. So I would just say, go ahead and get rid of that. So it's more symmetrical. So I'm only looking at the lines here. As far as the background, it's always interesting when you try to have highlights in the background, because again, where do our eyes go? To high contrast areas. They go to areas that have lots of highlights. So our eyes are getting pulled back there. So in this particular case, I would say that this helps. And that's partially because you're taking my eyes off of the subject of this rust, of this artwork or whatever it is. It kind of looks like some piece of artwork, but and pulling my eyes back there. So again, you're taking my eyes, you're taking me from foreground to background and pulling me back and forth. I also think by cropping this image a little bit, you could I really like this idea of a two-dimensional flat look. A lot of times we're going for form and depth, and I think it's really interesting to take this image and make it even more two-dimensional rather than going towards the three-dimensional. And I also think by making this two-dimensional image, I would have less immediate association with a physical world by doing that. So super interesting image. Again, I also wonder if it's more about the subject rather than and more about the reality of what we're looking at than the abstract of all of the textures and the shadows and the perspective that you were giving us in this image. So I would give this one an 8.
Flight of Fancy.
I would say I neither get voice or impact on this. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to look. Our eyes have a tendency to want to go to places that are sharp, and not that every image has to be sharp, not that not every abstract needs to be sharp, but I'm having a hard time grappling with what to look at. I'm looking at the image, trying to look at, is this the Earth and is this outer space? Trying to come up with my head's always trying to come up with some sort of story, or for me to be able to have some voice in the image to see what happens. For me, this one is a challenge. I'm not quite sure what the subject is. This is being isolated, but this is really overpowering for me to look at. And even these lines, these repetitions of these lines push my eye down there. I almost wish this image was more about this rather than everything that's going on down here. And I think that's what hurts this image for me. And so I would give this one a 6.
Your call.
So I'm sitting on the fence with this one. I don't think this is an abstract. This is really, I have an immediate association to what I'm looking at. It's a phone booth, and for me, it's about the subject of the phone booth, not about the highlights or the shadows. You're not allowing me to explore my own reality. You're telling me what the reality is. And I think for me, I would actually take this one out of abstract. I think it's an interesting image. So I don't want to rate this one. I like what's going on. I like the movement. I like all of the lines that are happening here. Really drawing my eye here. And for me, if we were leaving this one in abstract, I actually think all of that movement actually makes the image less abstract. And that's because you're really forcing me as a viewer to really push my eye in to what you want me to look at and really look at this. This is a telephone booth. So I think we should take this one out of this category.
Okay, we do have the option to DQ an image, which doesn't hurt the maker in any way.
Perfect.
If you feel it doesn't fit the category properly.
I think this could go in a better category.
Okay, I agree. This is Into the Night.
Super interesting image. I love the warm versus the cool. Again, do you call this an abstract? I know that you're asking me as a viewer to you're giving me a dream of what it looks like to feel like to be a horse and play chess, giving me that interesting shadow back there. Really interesting use of juxtaposition between a knight on a horse in the background, which is real, more real to life, with the shadow of a human and someone on a horse versus a chess piece. Again, I would not put this in abstract. Fun
Okay,
image, though.
so, yes. All right, so we are going to also DQ this one. Is that what you're feeling?
Yes.
Okay, Bob, after this one, let's split. We only have a couple of 10s that we need to hear from the makers, but after this one, let's go ahead and take a look at those.
Okay.
This is Warped Reality.
So for me, I asked myself, what is the subject? And I'm exploring human beings and how they are interacting with the image, whether being stretched up here or pulling my eye to here, to really be able to have the use of having people kind of go around in the circle there, which is interesting. Again, for me, this one's a hard one for abstract, but I still think it's good to go there, because I got to ask myself, is the subject the people? And I think that in some ways this hurts the abstract, because you have this abstract of these reflective, whatever the reflective object is, being able to, you're actually pushing the abstract to the background and then pushing forward the subject of the human beings in the image. And I think that in some ways hurts the image. I think it's a good use of even normally I don't like having, a lot of darks at the top, but this is really useful having that kind of really good subject down here. And I really think this shape down here that's happening here really kind of creates some foundation, as well as some of these elements down here to really kind of explore going up here. I would still say in the end, this is the subject, and I don't think I have a problem with this line right there. I want to be bothered by it, but I would still say it's not bothering me. It's there. It becomes background. It's maybe I'm asking what is it? I do see it here as well. And I think that helps having that kind of be a little bit more creative. Again, it would have been more interesting to really push the idea of abstract and not make it about the subject. And again, I guess I'll end on that is the object itself is abstract, but you're losing the abstract because that becomes background. The humans become the subject. And I will give this one a 7.
Okay, we've got a couple of 10s we need to hear from the makers on, and then we can continue with the rest of these. The first one should be undulating metal,
Yeah,
the
that's,
4th or 5th image. It's that black and white,
oh,
right?
yep.
And this is from Dan Greenberg.
Hi, yeah, this one is a subsection of the
Museum of Pop Art and Culture in Seattle. And all I did is, if you ever see the real building, it's pretty crazy. And so this was just a little section of it. And then I decided to make a very high contrast black and white out of just this subsection.
It's very nice. Thank you, Dan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Starlight, Star Bright from Brian Donovan. Was Brian on? I don't remember if I saw him.
I'm hoping to hear. I would love to know more about this image. It's great.
Well, honestly, when I first saw it, I thought it was from another one of our members because he had a dandelion photo that he submitted recently, and I thought, but the more I look at it, like, oh, that's a cactus. I don't know. Unfortunately, Brian is not on tonight. He didn't leave any notes about the image, so we'll just have to continue to guess.
This is Oz. This is a cactus.
Yeah.
And it's flowering. Probably a type of mammillaria. But anyway,
Okay.
great picture. I don't know for sure, but I didn't talk to Brian, but that's what I see.
Right. Okay, so these flowers are actually part of the cactus. It's
Yes.
It's not a composite.
No.
Oh, that's
No.
awesome. Beautiful.
Yeah. It's a great picture.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Oz.
You're welcome.
Next one is Gnarly Knot, and that is from Steve Wilton.
Hi, thanks for the detailed comments, Paul. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is simply a 3 to 4 inch in diameter tree knot on an ancient tree. And I did a lot of work in post on this one. Thank you.
Well, all your work paid off well, man. That's a very nice image.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the show. Sometimes you get the bear.
I am here. I'm thinking at the moment. Sorry, it's taking me a second.
Okay, no worries.
My first initial reaction is what is the voice in this image? What is the story for me? What is the, what is the, there's some texture in it, but it's not about the texture. It's kind of about, some of these shapes in here. I mean, really kind of looking at these two shapes. And it might have meaning depending on your own personal experiences of something, kind of almost like looking up into the clouds and seeing things, right? So being able to explore clouds and being able to see an object in there or something to that effect. Certainly in abstract, I have no idea what this is. But again, for me, not a lot of voice here, not really separating foreground from background other than, kind of having kind of a wet spot. It looks wet with some water or some sort of liquid on there to be able to kind of separate it. I don't have a lot to say on this image. There is some, a little bit of vignetting from the subject itself, not being created by vignette, to help it kind of move in a little bit, to kind of create the subject and isolate the image. But for me, you might have been able to pull off a better image for me if we would have went with more of a ratio like that, and not have anything on the top, so that it really kind of starts to look at this as the subject. I think having so much of this kind of 8:10 ratio makes it a challenge and where I'm supposed to be visually looking. And so I do really think that by getting rid of both of this and just kind of, cropping above there, cropping a little bit below there would have helped this immensely, and would have changed my response to the image. But as of the moment, I'd give this one a 6.
Iconic curves.
Is it about the curves? Is it about the paint? Is it about the car? Is the subject the lines and the colors and the shapes? Certainly got some. The colors are great on here. And I'm losing some of the photographer's voice because it's being made too much about the car. I always look at something like this as like, how do you take flat art? And I do photograph a lot of flat art for artists. And, normally what am I doing? I'm photographing it right on. I'm trying to be really representational of what that flat art looks like, so that when the artist tries to sell and be able to show, a gallery what the art looks like, to be able to make sure that it's representing it well. So that's not about me as a photographer, but about the artist that created it. And so that's where I start to get lost in this image, because I feel this is more about the subject rather than about the voice of the photographer. And I do like the symmetry look of it. I like that, we're adding some weight over here and having that symmetry, which is interesting, having kind of that shape here, but then still breaking some of the symmetry, making it a little heavier, a little lighter over here, and I mean visually lighter versus heavier. I know it's a little bit darker over here, and this has more highlights, so it kind of changes the balance, which I think is interesting. But again, I think the image could have been stronger if it would have been less about the metal of the car and more about how the photographer photographed it. Super interesting colors and textures and things going on. I even like, being able to see stuff like that. Kind of like everything that's going on, I think is super interesting. I think it could have been photographed at a slightly different angle to kind of bring out that photographer's voice. So with that, I am going to give this one. These numbers are hard. I'm looking at my other screen. I'll give this one an 8. It's just lacking some of that voice, but otherwise nice.
Good to the last.
It's crazy how bad Zoom does with images. The image is way sharper in real life than what's on this Zoom screen. Is this an abstract? This is about a liquid going into water. We'll go with abstract. I'll leave it. I don't think we need to disqualify this one. You know, super interesting use of colors. I think for me, I think there could have been a little bit more down here. It gets really flat. It feels gray. It feels mushy, soft. And even on my other screen, it just feels soft and doesn't really have a lot of weight. And I think that it would have been interesting to see if the Kelvin temperature or shifting the white, shifting the white balance a little bit may have helped. And we don't always need more contrast to make the blacks blacker, but I think it could have been helpful to kind of clean up the color temperature down there a little bit. It'd been interesting to see what it would look like if that was taken care of down there. Certainly, some of the interesting things here, that is really fun. All of these colors here. And again, my eye gets drawn back to here, and I don't want that. I really want to explore that, this, and this. And I really want to explore what's down here. I want to be able to bounce from here and over and kind of go back and revolve around, not kind of go back to everything else. So I think, again, I might have even looked at, kind of maybe getting rid of some of that. And you might even been able to go up a little higher and just not had this at all. I think that might have made for a little bit more interesting of an image, and it would have been more abstract as far as what the subject was, because I think what is abstract here is, this area down here. What are we looking at? What is the reflection of? What is it about? Where are they? And I think right now it's too wide and it's telling too much about whatever that is. So I would give this one a 7.
Shimmering branches.
I love the colors on this. I absolutely love being able to take the foreground and push it forward and be able to take the coolness and pull it back, and having all of the jagged lines and really being able to explore everything that's going on in the image down here. It's a really fun image. I love seeing those oranges. I love seeing those yellows. I love seeing this diagonal line, which makes the image a little bit more dynamic for me to be able to look through the image and want to enjoy it. Again, this one is kind of on that line. I don't have that immediate association to the physical world, but yet it's very much present here. It's very much about trees, very much about the branches and the water, but you're able, for me, to be able to disconnect from it. So I think it's a well done image, and I would give this one a 9.
Alluvium.
So I'm losing the separation from the foreground, the background. And that's partially because for me, again, this is way too sharp. It's taking away from whatever it happens to be, but from my mind, really seeing these veins here. I really want to be able to explore the veins. And because you have so much of that grit, so much of the texture, that you're pushing that background to the front. And I think it's really hurting the image. And so I would not have it so sharp down here. I really want to be able to explore all of these veins of whatever that subject is and not lose that. Even having that come out of these nice smooth lines here, even you can see these smooth lines, and then you see those veins of whatever it happens to be. It would be interesting to see if it wasn't quite as sharp on the edges, and I would give this one a 7. gonna fall asleep after this. It's fun to look at the images, but boy, does it fry me.
This is Adobe, Socorro, New Mexico.
Fun image. Really good use of not overwhelming the viewer by just using this as the subject only. Really using this dark area to really kind of offset how strong this is. And so, you know, if we were to clone this out, which I wouldn't recommend, I don't know the image would be as strong. Even having some of these lines here coming out from here, I think is really interesting. I like seeing the textures here, because even though there's lots of texture here in the background of the image, because of the contrast of having those deep shadows, the darkness, the dark tones in the image really keeps the textures from interweaving and making the image flat. So having that high contrast really does separate the image foreground to background. Without that, I think we would lose the image, like I was talking about in the other image where there was so much texture that I didn't know what I was looking at here. You know, you really pushed my eye. And then I think the other thing that's interesting, excuse me, in this image is, you know, there's an opportunity to explore this image again. So not only do you have this subject here that I'm looking at, but then you have the subject within the subject. And so that adds value to the image. You know, I think one of the things that I think is really, you know, makes an abstract or images in general really good is really being able to have me be able to explore an image and find new things. You know, how can you keep a viewer looking at the image more than 30 seconds or 5 seconds? How do you keep an image, someone looking at an image for a couple minutes? And I think being able to explore things like that really does help. Having that, you know, the kind of secondary subject in there within the subject. Also using those high contrast lines of all those white, you know, whatever they happen to be. I'm terrible at, you know, thank goodness, I'm terrible at exploring what things actually are. But then being able to have these white lines, I think adds some elemental interest, adding contrast to it, super useful. So I would say well done, and I'd give this one a 9.
Helix.
Great symmetry. You know, good use of symmetry, but still being able to make the image dynamic, really being able to explore all of the things that are going on in the image, you know, having the different color here versus the colors that are happening here, being able to explore a slightly different darker tones here versus less darker tones up here. Really that circular motion, the smoothness. So you have the smoothness of the outside of the frame, which I think is really great. It pulls my eye in, but then you start looking at all of the jagged lines. So a lot of stuff going on here. You know, there's some repetition. I even like how hard that straight line is there. I think it really kind of helps add to the symmetry. And it really want to explore, what am I looking at? What is going on? Looking at, you know, some of these smooth shapes, looking at the little circular spots that are going on here. A couple of things that I think hurt the image though is these lines out here are so smooth that you're pulling my eye away from the subject. Also, the right there where the lines are going up and then it's just automatically goes to the side, I think it is detracting from the subject and you're hurting the main subject, which is all of this. You should not be pulling my eye away from here. The smoothness over here, I think also hurts the image. Yes, it's creating this separation between the foreground and background. I would rather personally see more of this over here. I don't even mind having some of those lines here. It's not detracting from the subject. It's there, but it's really just pushing my eyes in here. It's telling me to look here. Same thing here. You're pushing my eyes in here in all of these 4 corners, except now you're trying to make this the subject in its own image. And I think it hurts it. for me, I think I'm leaning on the 9-10 here because of that. But, we'll lean towards a 10. We'll go with a 10.
Nonconformity.
It's very monochromatic. It has a very, one of the challenges I think I have personally dealing with more of a monochromatic image. It's not totally monochromatic. There's, it has some of the kind of yellow oranges, yellows, kind of that reds in there. So it's not completely, but it definitely makes it feel more static. And, when you have one design element, like where you have all warmish colors, what other design elements are you going to use to really be able to help captivate the viewer? And there's certainly some rectangular shapes going on in here. And, having some of these, more smoother lines over here in these areas does help. But what am I looking at? What is the voice? What is the, where's the depth? Very flat, kind of, for me, it is uninteresting. I'm not sure what I should be exploring here. I have no movement really around the image. Maybe if we would have, maybe darkened this area a little bit more and be able to separate it. Maybe we really explore in post this right here. There is a subject here. Within this box, there is a larger box within all those other rectangular shapes in these bricks of whatever nature this happens to be. So it would have been nice to be able to explore some separation there. So maybe you're making this a little brighter in here, or maybe you're making this a little darker. I think this image has potential. I just think at the moment it's a little flat. And I think you could take it and make it a little bit more interesting with just really kind of isolating bigger subjects within all those little subjects. And so for me, I would give this one a 6.
Farmer's ditch.
Again, I think what's for me interesting about this is when an artist can take an image and I know what it is, like I know it's water and there's probably a rock below there, but where you can actually take the actual environment and push it back. You're actually pushing it back and pulling the abstract portion of the image forward. And I think that's sometimes hard to do. So for me, this is a really fun image. Lots of textures going on here. I love being able to create depth in the image with having kind of the smoothness down here. Then we have kind of the rippling over here with those textures, but then you have a completely different texture with some of those highlights there. And then here is a whole different set of textures using kind of those darker tones of those lines, almost feeling like ink. It looks like there's ink just kind of floating in there. And I find that very interesting. So for me to be able to take something and where I'm trying to contextualize it and actually put it into its environment and taking the viewer and saying, no, I don't want to do that. I actually want you to push that back. And I want to bring the abstract further. I want to look at the textures and the lines and the form of what we're actually looking at and creating movement and really kind of looking at some of the repetition in different areas of the image. So really well done to really kind of force me out of me wanting to see reality. So for me, this is a 9.
Swirls of mercury.
Give me a second. I'm looking at a color calibrated machine with proper contrast.
Sure.
Okay, so, I see the movement, right? So we kind of see all this happen around here. It's kind of that movement. I start to lose the photographer's voice as a result of it. I think that the blacks don't feel black enough. The highlights don't feel highlighted enough. It's like, I want to see this image with contrast, even though there is contrast in it. It feels like it's almost washed out for me. And I think these areas end up becoming too strong for me. This is a hard one for me to be able to critique. I do like the isolation of subjects down here of the circular, and then going in a little tighter here. For me, this one doesn't share a lot. It'd be interesting to see what this one looks like bigger, printed at 5 feet. I think that the size of the subjects is always important in relationship to what we're looking at. And also, I think that it would be interesting to see, instead of looking on a glossy monitor where I'm looking on a more of a rag paper, or a smooth glossy paper, or really being able to maybe explore different surfaces, that I think that might be able to help this image a little bit more. So I would give this image a 7.
Twist and shout.
So my students have been really photographing a lot of, we photograph woodworking. We get to, the Red Rocks has a really good woodworking program here, and we get to photograph a lot of wood. And so as soon as I saw this, I'm thinking of all of these amazing woodworking projects that I've seen my students do. And, normally, again, this is very graphical. It's almost, really about the black lines rather than about, what's being blurred out or stretched or however it was created, and really about all of the negative space of just the dark tones in the image, and which is really fun. I really want to be able to explore all of those smooth lines. For me, none of this image is about any bit of what's in here. None of this is the subject. You're pushing that very far behind because it's being stretched, it's being elongated. I don't know what it is. I like being able seeing some of the highlights in the image, certainly here and here, which creates some depth. But then you take the image and you make it very flat, which is, in my opinion, great. Taking the blacks of the image and really just making it about the shapes. Really pushing that shape rather than that form, which makes it really interesting. So I would give this a 9. It's a fun image.
Leaf gone wild.
This is a trickery of the eye. I think it's really interesting, really being able to explore, like, what am I looking at? Like, and it looks like it's been burnt, right? It looks like there's been some fire, and I can see the background of more leaves back there. And I think what I find interesting most about this images, and when I downloaded these images prior to this was one of the images that I got stuck on to be able to really explore. You took an image, and yes, the background is a little out of focus. So, but then it still doesn't feel like there's any depth. It's almost like it was painted. It looks like it's very flat. It doesn't have a lot of contrast back here. And so I think it's a really interesting way of being able to take, this 3-dimensional space and being able to use depth of field to be able to try to separate, or, take that foreground of these leaves or whatever they are and the burnt, and then push back the out of focus leaves back there, but still being able to create this really 2-dimensional image. It's a really fun image. I'll give this one a 10. Again, this was a tricky one for me as far as, is it an abstract, And I think the ability for the photographer to be able to take this three-dimensional use of where you usually use aperture, reducing the depth of field, shooting at 2.8 or whatever you happen to be shooting at, to create that depth of field, and then doing that, but still making the image two-dimensional. So for me, that's where we kind of really left it at abstract. So nicely done.
Serendipity.
Again, for me, the frame hurts the image. I want this to be about these textures inside, not about this sharp line that is on the outside and the grays. For me, you're starting to build this relationship. You're using colors and that blue line that's in the scene itself, in the photograph. And then I'm starting to, because again, sometimes when I start looking at similarities in image. So I'm looking at, some of these grays and kind of these blues and then I'm reflecting on, oh, look, there's this really sharp line out here that has colors that are associated with here. Some of these grays that really kind of are in here. And I'm like, why does the photographer want me to be able to really make the frame part of the image? And so I think for me, this detracts from it. I really just want to be able to explore the image, not make it about the frame of the image. It almost for me feels like a fire. You have down here, it's like the base of the image, and then you have the flames coming up, which I think is interesting. This happened in another one of my images. You're looking at this line right here, and then it starts to dip down. All of a sudden, as soon as it starts to dip down, this becomes the subject. And you start to lose some of the abstract nature. And I think that this image could have been cropped ever so slightly to really be able to make it more about what it needed to be. So for me, this image here could have been extremely helped by just making this crop and getting rid of this other information. I don't think it's useful, this right here, to have this in the image. If anything, it detracts from it. I think the weight changes too much on it. And by having that visual weight change down here, I think it ends up hurting the image overall. And I'll give this one a 9.
The Abyss.
This one, you twist my reality. This is certainly one of my favorites that I've seen today. I know that I'm looking at a rock. I know that this is a rock right here, and you twist my entire reality by what is happening right here. It completely twist me up, and having this reflection, these strong reflections in this water, really pushes me from really contextualizing what I'm looking at. I think that the depth and the interesting nature of being able to, the way you photographed it, the way you cropped it, super interesting. For me, definitely one of the strongest images that I've looked at today. And I know we're not supposed to be, looking at them as a whole, but really powerful image. In the sense of twisting my reality of like, it's a rock, water, reflections, but there's so much going on here that just well done with your highlights and your shadows, and really being able to force that depth of field, even having this right here and then being able to isolate this in here, really strong. I mean, this is what makes the image right here, without a doubt. Certainly having this over here kind of helps create some balance, and it visually would have been too dynamic and overwhelming without having this rock here. I would not have liked the image. I think that it would have been too much for me to visually look at, and you allow me some time to process the image. Being able to have this in the image allows me to breathe for a moment and then be able to go back into what I'm looking at, which is this in here, to be able to explore this image. So this is a 10.
This is A Painter's Dream.
So of course, without knowing what the photographer has done or created or done in Photoshop, etc., you know, this does remind me of photographing flat art. You know, is this about the photograph of how the photographer is, you know, letting his vision of being a photographer come through, or is it more about the artwork of just what looks like a painting? And again, this one is very hard for me to rate from a photography standpoint. You know, here we have these, like, you know, we have the diagonal lines repeating over and over again. You know, but then I don't know, I'm not sure what the subject is here. I'm getting lost in, like, you know, again, we see this repetition and then we see a really big blue space, you know, so doesn't this need to be background? Is that supposed to be going to the foreground? Is that supposed to be the subject? I almost feel like it should be a little thinner here and not so much blue, because it is pulling my eye there. And for me, this hurts the image. You know, this is decent down here again. You know, I'm losing the photographer's voice in this image, and I give this one a 6, 7. Let's go with a 7 here.
Splash.
Really, really strong vertical line. You know, the question for me is that helping the image, or is it moving my away from it? It's so thick. And, you know, you have all of these other lines, right? And really, I want to be able to explore this. And again, sometimes, like that other image we were looking at, it's nice to have a break from all of the chaos of sometimes of what an abstract can create. But, you know, for me, this becomes almost too much of the subject and gets stuck on it. I think that it would be interesting to see what this image looked like if we were to rotate this clockwise and make this the horizon line. And then really, if we were to rotate this, my eye would be going up, right? And I get a little confused. So right now we can, you know, if the image was rotated clockwise, that was what my eyes would be doing. What you're doing to me right now is the line is actually going this way. And so you're forcing me to go to this line. And I think that actually is like, so is this the subject, or is this the subject? So I think it would be interesting to be able to really explore what this looked like. I think the other thing that would happen is the rotation would happen is what would happen to this down here. Again, adding that as visual weight down there definitely helps ground the image, but it almost feels like you could have this, I can't even, that's horrible. I can't think of the Starry Night, right? The artist that did Starry Night. What is it, Da Vinci?
Bingo.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yeah. And it feels like if we were to rotate that, that's what this image almost becomes for me, is that art. So it's almost like you're exploring the night sky if the image would have been rotated. So, you know, interesting. The other thing I think that I would have probably cloned out is like just that random thing right there. I think detracts from your image. Those two little spots right there. It's like it's isolated. It has a little bit of highlights around the edge with dark, you know, dark insides. And I think depending on how big the image prints would be useful to just go ahead and clone out of there. I will go ahead and give this image a 7.
Feathered.
Nice use of textures and colors, having the blues and the yellows really kind of helping complement each other, taking and having some smooth lines here, as well as all of the circular shapes, and then really kind of starting to see some of the other textures that live in here. There is an element of some depth going on in here. Certainly the first thing I look at when I look at here is these strong lines. And then second, going down to here, which feels like it's at the second level, and then looking at this at the third level. So there's definitely some nice things that are going on in here. I also wonder if this is becoming too much of the subject. And again, maybe a slight crop, not much, might have helped this image ever so slightly. I like having those shapes in there. And so I think that for me would have made it a little bit stronger. I don't think I needed to see all of this to still be able to explore the image over here. I think it kind of takes away from it. I still like having those shapes over here, but then it really kind of pushes these lines and make them a little stronger. And I still get everything that I need from the image. And I'll give this one an 8.
And our last image of the evening, water drop collision.
Is it about the water and the drop of the water? Or is it about the abstract of what the water reflection is creating? And that's the first question I ask myself as I start to look at this image. Certainly having some quadrants that are being created as a result of the image, and having 4 different sections as a result of this is, kind of interesting, being able to see some of the different textures here and some of the gradients that are happening with those greens. But again, I want to be able to explore the abstract of the reflections, not the subject of the water. And so for me, that hurts the image here a little bit. A fun drop. These are fun shots to be able to create and do, whether you're doing, different things in post or creating it, as in life, and being able to capture this as you're creating those droplets of water. But again, that abstract, I want to really be able to explore more of these greens and these reds and these blues. And I want to spend more time on these areas, not on the water droplet itself. And so I think that I think it's fine that it's in this category and doesn't need to be disqualified, but it certainly does bring down for me, the reality of a water, you're creating that water droplet reality for me. And maybe if I wasn't a photographer, I would look at this image differently on how it was created. With that being said, I would give this one a 7.
We have about 7 9s and 10s to go look at. So Bob, if you want to filter for those, and we'll go back to the shimmering branches, which was that nice reflection on the water, just a little left of where you are now. And that's from Ron Schaller.
Yes, thank you, Paul, for all your comments tonight. This is really pretty straightforward, just shot reflections in a pond, and I just worked with the contrast and the color a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you, Ron. The next one would be the Adobe Socorro, New Mexico from Barb Lake.
Oh, you never cease to amaze, Paul. Everything you said, I thought of. I mean,
that's awesome.
Really, especially this part. When I saw that pop out when I was working on it, I was just so awed, because it just added so much to it. But I didn't expect anybody else to see it, but I should have known. But thank you very much for your kind words.
Thank you, Laura. Next up would be Farmer's Ditch, which is not that one.
That's Farmer's Ditch.
That's right. I'm sorry. You're right. Victoria's Helix.
You want to go back to Victoria's?
Yes, please. Sorry, I didn't mark that off to the side of my sheet.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Again, I appreciate your comments. I developed that just with some presets, and I took that into consideration. So thank you very much.
Okay, so now we can go to the farmer's ditch, which is from
Hi.
Steve Wilton.
Yes, again, appreciate your detailed explanations, Paul. What was interesting about this is the tree overhanging the ditch, which gave those funny little lines throughout there. Pretty simple shot. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, Steve. And Twist and Shout, that is from Susan Hafke.
Yeah, this is, you were right on this. This was wood and it happens to be a wine barrel. And I just used various different distorted filters to make this image. So, and I appreciate all your input on this. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Susan. And this is Leaf Gone Wild from Bill Dixon.
Yeah, this is us down in Florida, and took this walking through and saw this palm tree with this leaves on it, which looked like it had a leaf within a leaf. And so I wanted to really highlight the inner leaf, so it would really stand out.
So Bill, did you happen to see the kid with the magnifying glass who actually did this and burned through the leaf? Because that's what it looks like. I spent almost 30 years in Florida, and I recognize this as a big, one of those giant palm leaves.
Yeah.
But I'm
Right.
thinking some kid with a magnifying glass was having a good time that day.
That's funny. Yeah.
Okay, our next one is Serendipity, and that's Gwen Patton.
Okay, thank you for your comments on this photo. This was taken, I was sitting in the passenger seat going through a car wash. So that is what that is.
Very nice. Now we have the most confusion from an image that we had tonight. And yeah, scored a 10. The Abyss from Bill Rothenmeier. Is Bill here? I don't remember if he made it tonight. Doesn't look like it. He just said that this was taken at Abyss Lake near Mount Evans. But yes, I agree with you, Paul. This image was a mind bender. This was this was like Inception kind of thing.
Yep.
Okay, I believe that is it. We are done. We have made it through. Paul, I want to thank you very much for all of your wonderful. Oh, let's go learn some Lightroom stuff now. Thank you for all the wonderful comments. I appreciate the detailed explanation on a variety of our images there, and hopefully other people also got good information from this, learned a bit. Sometimes it's hard to be critical of your own work. Sometimes you get married to a crop or a process or something like that, and getting somebody else's view is sometimes very helpful. It allows you to see other things that you may miss sometimes. Does anybody else have any comment? Or Victoria, did you want to say anything?
I just want to say thanks. I don't know why my camera's not working. Sorry about that. But
Okay.
I just want to thank those that came out this past Sunday to the Railroad Museum. We had an awesome time. Hopefully got some wonderful photos. So thank you for those that participated. We had an awesome time.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that was successful. That's pretty awesome.
Yes.
It's something that the club needs to do a bit more often,
Right.
Thank you for organizing it, Victoria.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you to Lucius he said he's been there 3 times now, so I think
Yes, I will.
he doesn't want to go back.
Okay, well, I don't have anything else to say. Paul, do you have any final comments for us or any words of wisdom before you go to bed?
Yes. I think it's just, I'm really grateful I was able to be here. You're always welcome to reach out to me. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to, if you have any specific comments about the work of art that you want me to critique a little bit more, please reach out. And then the only other thing I want to say, if you all wanted to do a field trip, I just went and saw Modern Woman, Modern Vision at the Denver Art Museum, and everyone should go. The work there was phenomenal. It's worth every penny and then some. So if you haven't seen it at Denver Art Museum, some of the photographers, the women photographers there, just have changed how photography has been done. Please go to that show. It's Modern Women, Modern Vision. So please go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank
Thanks,
you all for
Paul.
coming. Thank you all for submitting your images and hanging in till the end. I appreciate it. And I think we'll just call it a night here.
Yeah.
Thank you all. And thank you, Angela, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. I soaked it up.
Awesome. That's what we hope for. That's what these competitions are for. All right. Good night, all.
Laura, call me. Laura, call me. Come visit, okay?
My pleasure. I'd love to.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye, Paul.